Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Do you want? I reckon we just start. We do the introductions, and then let's get going. Let's keep it
Yes.
a thought bite, nice and short. Welcome and thank you for joining us, everyone. So this is part of a psychosocial series of webinars where we've tried to break down in really thought bite and digestible components, the different parts of psychosocial safety, the different frameworks, the different parts you want to think about. And today we really excitingly, I'll let Niru show more on all the thinking. She's done great work bringing all this and all the research, but thinking about the frameworks really help guide your journey from an organization perspective of psychosocial safety. From So I'm from MindMuse, and MindMuse, we help particularly people doing the psychosocial work be able to make the most of their qualitative interviewing and focus group data so that they can actually help the people and give voice to what the people actually say and not be at risk of their own bias and taking too many shortcuts. So that's a bit of what we do. And joining us, of course, we have Anu who does excellent work and actually doing the work and has been on the ground for quite a while and really understands, but also really enjoys doing a lot of the research to understand what is the best practice and how can we really push this field forward. So really lucky to have her really sharing her knowledge with you today. I'll pass it on
Totally.
to you.
All right. Am I excited? Yes, I am excited. I am excited because we've been learning about how psychosocial hazards impact individuals and how to take care of that, how to investigate what it really does to people, and then what controls we can put in for that. And then we've looked at teams. And in this section of the webinars, we're looking at organizations. But after today, I think there's one webinar in which we will talk about case studies. But then I think the next one or the one after next, we will basically try to bring all that knowledge together, and then we'll have a series which explains how to implement all of the understanding that we've developed so far and what is the industry knowledge that's coming at the moment with regards to implementation, because that's where the money is, isn't it? I mean, we can all talk fancy stuff, but how does it look like when you actually put it on the ground, Felix? That's where we want to get. And realistically, I was having a chat actually yesterday with one of the managers that I work with, and they are from human resource background, and they were like, how are we ever going to be able to negotiate what overwork looks like? Like, it's a different thing for a different person. It is so subjective, it is so personal, and it is very, like, people take personal offense if they get told that you are giving too much work to your subordinates or you're not giving enough work to them. They take personally. So to create systems that actually, talk to it and quantify it and challenge it is going to be a very interesting journey in the psychosocial space. I'm very excited what's going to come out of it in the next 5 years, Felix. All right. So today we're going to talk about the governance and governance model, which is basically the conversation around how we talk to leaders about psychosocial and how we ensure that leaders understand what psychosocial is about from an organizational point of view, and also what they need to look at, because half the time the leaders don't know what to look at to get the information that they need so that they are also ensuring that the organization complies with safety. So that's where we are at. So I've given you a little bit of a rundown here. It's not the whole story. You have the board mandate, they decide the risk appetite, that's how it works. And then they talk about due diligence, then you go to the accountability, then they decide who owns this. It'll be a few ELT members owning their own little business units. And then the ELT people say, okay, what is the hazards in my area? And then they design the controls, develop a policy around that. And then they create all the boards, the electronic boards, not the other board, electronic boards, switchboards, and indicators to capture that information. And ensure that the board's intent is being carried forward. That's the basic structure, and it has holes at every step. And that's what we want to sort of elucidate and talk about as to what really is going on here. Felix, the next slide, please. So we apply this same, circular model here, and we say, what, how will the board or an organization apply this? And we're going to say, define the scope, identify the organizational hazard, assess. It's the plan, do, check, feedback model. But I've put it in there just to reiterate that it does not change when it comes to psychosocial hazard. We still have to do it. The extra one I have put in between is consult. Sometimes they put consult like a circle all around, because they suggest that consultations should start from the discovery up to the feedback point of view. I've just put it there on the side because in the initial stages of the project being done or the work being done, there isn't really a big consultation happening, at least not in a formal way. But I have put it there to formalize it, that we do also need a formal consultation process to happen, not just an informal one. Next one, Felix. We're coming to the more interesting part in a minute. So this is my hierarchy of controls. The reason I call it my hierarchy is because it's upside down, and it is not based on the quantity. It's based on the impact. So as you know, the eliminating and reducing exposure is the most impactful way of controlling it. So you have your removal of unnecessary work, removal of harmful practice, reduce, chronic overload, those kind of controls in the elimination. Or then you'd redesign systems as you come down, and you strengthen governance, support, and response is the administrative equivalent. And then you have the train individuals to cope, where resilience programs, well-being programs, EAP come. So, and it's an unfortunate part that when we talk of psychosocial, people tend to talk about all these, the very low level controls, rather than about design, about support and response, all of that. Anyway, what is the more interesting part is how we're going to teach the leadership to manage the governance aspect. So in the next slide, you'll see that we have a practical control library. And I thought it would be helpful to have it, just for your reference in future, like what does it practically look like, I have got the 6 aspects that we discussed last week about demand, time, control, clarity, change, and justice. So these are the 6 hazards from an organizational point of view you're looking at. And you want to sort of say, okay, you know what? These are the things that can cause harm from an organizational point of view. There's too much demand on my work. I don't have enough time. I don't have control. There is no clarity, change is too much, or justice isn't there. But how does it show up in the organization? That's probably the more important thing. And what does an organization need to do to get that needle to shift on all of these hazards? So from the leadership point of view, what do they need to manage? They need to look at the demand capacity. They need to look at work pruning from demand, staffing buffers, KPI resets, like, do you really have a demand problem? If you do, what are the things that you can do and monitor? Because we know that what we can measure, we can control. What we don't measure, we don't control. So if you have controls that cannot be measured, they are not good controls. So this slide is probably my golden slide for today's conversation, because it basically tells you that if you are going to be managing time for your staff, what are the things you're going to look at as controls that you can manage? Each one of these words refers to a process. And if you want to know more about it, talk to me, send me an email, go to my Substack, because I am still publishing all of these frameworks, because these words have been taken from different frameworks, and they actually articulate very clearly how an organization can redesign a roster, for example, how can an organization design recovery windows? How can the breaks be monitored in a positive way? How can you manage on-call limits in a humane, ethical way? All of these things. And you know what's the best part is that these all activities have been done separately by different organizations in the world, and they have seen results come in a positive way of all these things. So they're all tried and tested. I have not invented anything here. I've simply gone and looked at various research, various industry efforts, and I'm just kind of showing it to you that this is what people are doing. So for example, the controls are participatory redesign. So that means that you just basically participate with your subordinates and redesign the work so they feel a more sense of control. Delegation of authority, consultation gates, workflow autonomy, all of these things will give a person better sense of control, that they are managing their work well, but also the leadership and a visibility and a way of managing that and understanding that these are being done in a proper way. And these are all practices that have been incorporated in the workflows and processes of human resource departments of organizations in different parts of the world. Probably the thing here, the key here is we are all health and safety people managing psychosocial risk, but this has been in the domain of human resource up to now. And it is kind of now us interfacing with them and creating that quantification. So for example, clarity of roles is role charts. Do we want to just go back, Felix, one more time? I will go briefly through the last three. You can read at your own time. So role charts, decision maps, and interface controls and escalation rules. And then change is, again, change risk gates. These are all terms, and you can Google these terms if you have time and just look at what comes up by way of research. You're most welcome again to look into my other articles which have more details on each one of them. Okay, let's go to the next slide then, Felix. In the interest of time. Okay, so measurements of indicators. So what does a dashboard looks like? So here I'm thinking of basically an Excel or a paper version of a dashboard, but we are looking at indicators. So we have leading, intermediate, and lagging indicators. So you have all these things are taken again from different frameworks. It's the leadership priority index, demand control, support role change scores, overtime misses, breaks, rosters, instability, vacancies, backlogs, and demand capacity imbalance. So these are all leading. And I would really focus you onto these, because if these are not managed well, you are going to head to a situation where things are going to get more difficult down the line. What the intermediate indicators look like are, now let me just step back for 1 minute. Indicators are not hazards. They are not risks. These are basically what you have in an organization, which is indicating that there are hazards which have now become risks. There are hazards which have become incidents. There are hazards which have now led to injuries. So this is different to hazards, but it is pointing straight at them. So now an intermediate indicator is like a burnout, grievance, bullying and harassment, all of that. These are intermediate. And then you have the lagging one, in which people actually stop turning up for work. People leave organizations. You start getting your claims, and there's costs to that involved, and days are lost. All right, next one, Felix. So where do I get all of this from? This is just to illustrate that there have been two case studies, and I can give you more details on them later on. But the Metropolitan Council case, they've kept the name of where and which council it was, just from privacy point of view, but it is a published one, and if you need a reference to it, I'll share. It was a director-led steering group, and the HSC indicator tool and employee survey was undertaken. Corporate and directorate action plans were made. the rota and work patterns were reviewed, and stress-related sickness days fell by about a third. So it's just evidencing, like in the previous two slides that I've shown you, of how these guys managed it. So they didn't take all of them, they just picked a couple and then started monitoring them. And just even those helped. And in the NHS Hospital Trust case, the workforce and OD directors sponsored it. The data from absences, turnover, grievance, and well-being was collected. Staff consultation was done. Hotspots were analyzed. Unions were involved. And this reduced the sickness, absence, and improved communication patterns. So these are case studies for you. If you want, I will share with you later on. Next one, Felix. So now what we have is a bit of a maturity model just to kind of understand which organization you are with and what it looks like from a maturity point of view. So you have the reactive, compliant, managed, integrated, and assured model. It is very similar to safety maturity model. It's not different, but the indicators are slightly different because obviously psychosocial injuries are different. Most of us in Australia at this point are hanging in the compliant to reactive level. Unfortunately, people are code aware, policies exist, but basic risk assessments may or may not be in place. Action plans, assigning risk owners, some organizations have done, but it is still a way away before. Yeah, I can tell you from my own experience that there are not a lot of organizations that are in the managed space in Australia. So while from safety point of view, you can find, high safety maturity level, psychosocial safety is not mature at the moment in Australia generally. Sad, but true. We're getting there. Next one, Felix. So what does an implementation map look like? I talk about it often, and I think I spoke about it in the Workplace Health and Safety show as well. It's basically, going into an organization, finding all these things that are not there, and what do you do first? What do you do second? And what do you do third? Which is why I kind of say, okay, you know what, you can pace yourself a little bit. But first, in the first 30 days, and it takes that much time, getting a board mandate, getting the executive across, and accessing the data will take at least 30 days in a medium-sized company. And then you do your consultations, reviews, surveys, and this is assuming that their safety processes and systems are in place. Sometimes you go in and you find that the organizations haven't reviewed their safety procedures. So there will be another step between this and the other one, which will require you to review their documentation and their governance frameworks. Well, once you've done that, you do your surveys, you do your consultation and review your hotspots, and then that's when the actual work comes in. It's in the third month or fourth month mark of you working in an organization that you actually start looking at workload, your staffing, role changes, checking the PDs if they really reflect what people do, and what's happening in the organizational justice area and all of that. And then, about in a year's time, sometimes more, you can actually report the true state of the business to the board and have some learnings and start testing your controls. So what questions does the board need to ask, or do you need to ask of the business? Next one, Felix. And these are some simple questions that you can take and sort of ask people in the organization. What are the demands above sustainable capacity? Where are they? Which roles carry chronic ambiguity, conflicting accountabilities? Because people won't be able to give you numbers, but they will be able to sort of point you where these problems are. Which organizational change have not had psychosocial risk review? Like normally, if you have an organizational change process, you will have a psychosocial risk review as well to ensure that that change is managed appropriately. If they are not doing that, then you want to know why. Where do workers have low influence over worker that affect them? So you're looking at agency, different power, difference in the level of power between employees. What conduct patterns are tolerated, repeated, poorly closed? Yep. So sometimes, like in construction, for example, people are very comfortable, swearing. Is that a culture thing or is that an abuse thing? So it may be different in a different context. So you're looking at those sort of patterns. Which controls were verified, not merely announced? And that's the million-dollar question that I've been talking about for days now. That it's great to have controls on paper, but are they verified? Is there a way of checking them, measuring them, ensuring that they're happening? All right. So closing this loop is what are we really doing here? So last 2 weeks ago, we talked about the hazards. And now we've kind of spoken about what governance looks like, what implementation looks like, and what sort of questions you can ask the leaders so that they can start monitoring the things that will actually be measured and will get you to a place where psychosocial safety exists. So in order to close the loop, that is all that you need to do in sequence of one another. Surveys are still a part of the process. Well-being campaign is also, policies also, and you start with the governance, diagnosis, redesign, and assure. And mind you, the assure part is probably the most important part. I'm going to talk a little bit about the frameworks, Felix, before I finish off, because these are the frameworks that I've put up in the slide 8, was it? Slide 7. So the aspects that I've sort of suggested to monitor for organizations have come from these frameworks. I haven't yet published much on, I think I've published HSC standards, but I haven't really. These are the more newer frameworks and some new research has come through, but I'm more than happy to share the information that I have about them. But they are quite exciting and they look very promising in the way they've been doing things. So have a squeeze when you get a chance. The ISO 45003, I think I've published as well. I haven't really done any work in this space for a month, Felix, so I've been so busy with other stuff. I have to go and have a look. Anyway, so if you look at the where am I? I've lost my track of thought. Yeah, so if you look at the next slide of how to apply frameworks together. So basically the formula that I'm giving you is that you need to know all of these frameworks, but then you can apply them step by step within your organization. So the governance framework you can get from the ISO 45003, the scanning aspect and gathering information you can get from the HSC and the code, and the explanation of risks and identification, leadership priority, all of that you can do with the PSC and job design model. And then the designing itself you can do from the Prima EF. And then finally, the assurance aspect also you can use 45003. Reach out to me if you want to know more about this slide. It is not rocket science, I can tell you that. It's pretty straightforward, actually. And then there's a little bit more explanation here of how you would use it, for example, in case of chronic overload. At the moment, that's been my favorite topic because any person you speak to is overworked. And it's kind of ironic because can I have a little bit of a whinge? Please, I want to have a bit of a whinge. There are people who do not have work and who are applying and applying and applying. And then there are people who are overworked. And is it me only? But like, why not get the people who are not having work into the employment so people who are having the work can be less stressed? But somehow our economy doesn't work like that. So this is my make it make sense kind of question. But I digress. So going back to work, chronic overload, the governance question is the workload formally identified? So that's basically you're pinning it down and saying this is overwork and this is not overwork. And then HSE demands question is, this is the exposure part, um, where workload, pace, hours, basically you're answering the where question. And then from the priority, like how you prioritize what you're going to do, is when production pressure conflicts with psychosocial health. Because although we talk about production as if we are in manufacturing, but we are all producing something, right? So you talk to anybody in June and they're like pressed for doing everything because their deadline suddenly hit them. So that's the production pressure we are talking about. And then job design is my favorite part where we actually do some creative work, and then we're asking what are we going to do, which demands are chronic, which resources are missing, where is the control low, and also to a point where, and there's a $1 million question that comes in and you will get a pushback there, that where resourcing needs to happen, and then you need to go to procurement and you need to put some dollar bills behind your request. That also needs to happen. But unless you've done the 3 steps before, no way under the sun you will be able to evidence that there is actually chronic overload in the organization and that you need to have more resourcing. So that's why that design stage becomes important. And then implementation question is, who owns this whole thing? Who's going to, get off their backside and actually do it? And how are we going to prove that it's been done? That's the exciting part. And again, the last one is, I think that's my last slide for you. It's a little bit different take on the whole thing. How do you choose the right framework? Does it integrate into your governance? Where the exposures are? So again, a little bit broader from chronic overload, and this is like a broader brush that we're talking about. But every framework answers a question of risk and what it adds to your, management process. I know it seems like a lot, but a lot of it is new information because industry hasn't really collectively looked at it. All I can say is that once we implement it, and I have seen it in the last 2 organizations that I've worked with, it becomes like wallpaper. Everybody is happy, business as usual, and it becomes the foundational expectation. Anyway, that's it for today. I think I have a couple of pages of references if anybody wants to dig into them. Do we have any questions, Felix?
I think we good. I do just want to wrap it up for if anyone has to leave. But great job putting all that together.
Yeah.
I think it really paints a picture as to how the frameworks can integrate into the, particularly more from an organization perspective, as well as into the implementation of psychosocial